All right, welcome to the Yes and podcast, where we explore what it means to be a good human. I've got my son, Aspen Wagner, here, and we've been having some interesting conversations about beauty and truth. And we wanted to explore one particular aspect of our discussion together. Want to explain more, Aspen?
Yeah. First, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Papa John. Thank you, Dr. Wagner, for having me on. I'm happy to help out with the setup for
Happy
this.
to have you.
But yeah, what we were talking about yesterday was more about truth and art and beauty. And so I think we'll go kind of in the backwards order of what I just said, starting with beauty. Where the basic idea is beauty is kind of the demonstration or unveiling of what is true. And so in that sense, science is beautiful, math is beautiful, art is beautiful. And I think that art and math and science are beautiful in different ways, where art is more a showing of what's true to a person, what's true to humanity, and science and math is just what's true.
I like that. I don't think we even got that far in the conversation the other day. So I get that ties into what we were talking about bees, right? So at some point, the discussion had turned to the innateness of some of the things that our species does or other species do, right? There are some, and birds, whether they've ever seen a nest, will build a nest, right? It's
Right.
intrinsic to them. It's inside them, somewhere in their DNA and their epigenetics and the rest of what they are. And one of the things I also found interesting is some birds will have their very distinctive calls and sometimes very complicated calls. And even if they've never heard them,
In isolation, they still do it.
they still do it,
Yeah.
which is, it means it's inside them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about like, well, what's inside us? What's inside us as humans? Like, what are the innate portions of ourselves that we could recognize that are true across all humans?
Getting money.
Maybe. Competition's in there somewhere, I'm sure. But we're talking about bees and how, hexagons, which actually do, like, they abut the mathematical part of truth that you're talking about. Like, they are mathematically describable.
They're pretty great.
Everything is. But yeah, bees will make those consistently while having incredibly tiny, neural systems, their little baby bee brains. And so I think we had landed on, perhaps to a bee, a hexagon is beautiful.
Yeah. There's an interesting, I think, difference, though, which is that most animals, I mean, this is broad, but bees specifically, I would say act pretty much on instinct. And so what's beautiful to a bee, which is kind of a fun concept to think about because we don't really know, we can't ask them, but is probably different to what's beautiful to a human because we can abstract, like so many abstractions where, maybe a dam is beautiful to us, nerds, where we can have, more complex. Maybe that's it. Or maybe it just opens the realm of possibility in general.
I definitely think that, we're playing with a multi-sided dice, right? And we're playing with multi-sided dice. So there's that. You can get more interesting combinations of ideas together than they seem to be able to. And yet, we shouldn't really, underestimate how complicated their lives are, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like one of the only other species that can communicate to one another distance and direction and it actually is immensely complicated. We just happen to be slightly more complicated or significantly more complicated, and we don't give it enough credit.
And I can't really dance, so they have that on me.
Yeah, it's you have it or you don't, I guess. So going back to beauty then. So beauty would be, in this model, it would be something like the matching of the intrinsic to the extrinsic. When what you see matches what you are perhaps primed to see, or what you were born to see. That's probably good, what you were born to see.
Yeah. And so I think an interesting thing here, which we were talking about the other day, is if we take art, which is this intrinsic viewing of humanity, and by that definition, art is beautiful and beauty is truth. So then the question is, can art lie? I think the real question is that a good question to even ask? Mm-hmm. Because if we make this definition where art is based on what is true to people, then art can't lie. Or something that does lie maybe disqualifies itself as even being art.
Yeah, I almost would want to graph this, right? Because you have art, beauty, truth, and we're trying to exclude from the categories certain things to see where we're limiting, as you would do, to establish a category, what isn't in the category. It would seem that if beauty is the sense of congruency, then things could be incongruent with what you're looking for, and they would be unbeautiful or not beautiful. Mm-hmm. So I think being mammals, one of the things that we share all the way down for millions and millions of years is the idea of mother, like looking for the pattern of mother in the world.
Yeah. But
when you find a mother who's incongruent with mother, right, that's where the archetypes of witches or I don't know, it's almost every villain in Disney.
It's a good place to look for archetypes, isn't it?
Yeah, they mess around with those. You can quickly build a story with some of the basic building blocks.
Yeah.
And then start to compare and contrast what you would expect versus what you're finding. But yeah, like a deceptive, controlling from Tangled, mother that, so that would be, like, what is the opposite of beauty with that model? Ugly. It'd be just ugly, right?
Yeah, which I guess would be a lies, right?
What if it were song? If music can be beautiful, like dissonant?
Yeah.
Chords actually, each chord might be like a claim on whether it is beautiful or not.
Yeah.
Because some are dissonant and you're like, not about that one. But then when they resolve, and almost all music resolves, right? That's when it's beautiful. Just like Disney, walks you back to the proper archetype at the end.
Depending. Are you talking about like chords that are not set up perfectly? Like chords that are made to be dissonant? Or are you talking about music or sounds that sound bad?
I'm talking about chords.
Okay.
And I'm thinking very specifically about chord progression, right? Because it is essentially a story, whether you notice it or not. There's different ways to build. It's actually very fascinating. I wonder if it's analogous to a lot of other aspects of art and beauty.
Yeah. I was terrible at music theory.
That was okay. But I mean, it's infinitely deep, right? Like there's no end to how deep you can go into that universe.
Yeah.
So if we were talking about beauty, and if that's what matches what is intrinsic, which would be, I mean, if you break music theory down into the actual harmonics of music theory, the vibrations,
it's pretty mathematical.
It could be fully described mathematically.
Some people have probably done that before or something.
Yeah, Fourier's, right? Yeah.
Pythagoras as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even the sounds of our own voices, it's just vibrations. And we're just encoding and decoding information via vibrations.
Yeah. It's interesting. We had talked about this before, and it's probably not an original idea at all, but how...
I'm not sure many are.
How the BPM of music that sounds acceptable to us roughly aligns with human heartbeat.
Yeah. Yeah, like almost perfectly.
Yeah.
Like if it gets too slow, we get meh. Or if it's too fast, we're like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, from like 60 to like 180-ish.
Yeah, I think maybe 220 you can get up to for a bit, but it starts to sound really hectic. And then, if it's 40 beats per minute or 30 beats per minute, I don't think anything is really even written at 30 beats per minute unless you start using, you'd have to accommodate by using, eighth notes and you're cheating. Yeah, you're cheating. Yeah. Cheating away there.
It could just be a coincidence as well, but feels cool to say, right?
Yeah. it gets, if one presupposes that the brain is a pattern recognizer, and that's what it does. Like it just recognizes patterns. And then we got clever enough to recognize patterns of patterns, which allowed for abstraction, right?
Sure.
And then recombination of those patterns of patterns, which is story, and it's like the changing patterns across time, which would be what we're talking about with chords. The chord progression is up. I mean, a chord is definitely a pattern because you tend to stay in a key, right? And then just move back and forth between the patterns. And there's not even that many within a key. I don't know, maybe there are 30 or 40. But then you can shift keys.
You can,
and that in itself says something in the story.
Sure.
It's interesting. All right, so going back to music and beauty, or excuse me, art, beauty, and truth. Well, truth is such an enormous claim.
Right. Does it matter? And is it if truth is actually true or if it's just perceived? Because I think with art, it might not matter. Because I think a good example of this would be that how things are beautiful differently to different people. If you think about maybe some art piece that might be propaganda to some, might be beautiful to others.
Yeah.
Because it's true to them and not true to the other people.
It really puts truth deeply into the relative category.
Yeah, I think some truths could be relative, but not all of them. I mean, I think math is the best example.
What if truth is a claim not about personal conviction, but about consensus?
Go ahead.
I do recall hearing, cleverly I thought at the time, that humans aren't truth-seeking animals we think we are, but we're actually consensus-seeking animals. So truth, it kind of builds on the model that we were talking about with who are you as an individual versus who are you when you're in the presence of others. But what if the concept of truth is what I am imagining or perceiving? And those kind of blend together, actually, because you can imagine something so hard it's like perceiving it. Does it match what I think other people think?
Sure. I'm not sure if that's entirely it.
I don't know either. Can you have if you hold, say you are convinced of a claim, you believe a claim that no one else does, you would describe it as my truth.
And you'd be a witch.
Yeah, maybe. Well, they can get their ideas out in other people's heads, right? That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Put a spell on you, make you believe their truths.
Pretty evil
Which
stuff.
we would describe as lies, right? You actually end up like with the opposite. You talk about symmetry, like truth and lies are a very common theme in everything, like
right?
All story,
Yeah.
Is what you're saying. Is it? It does kind of feel like it is something about consensus, which is scary.
Yeah, consensus is there. I don't know if that's. I mean, it's probably what we seek more than truth, for sure, because we're social animals and we don't need to be right, but we need to be accepted, I guess.
Yeah, being cast out from the tribe is a death sentence.
Womp womp.
So then you'd have to, and this is maybe where we don't want to go too far down too many rabbit holes here, but you could see how the concepts of truth as kind of more modernly understood ought to be demonstrable, or many of them ought to be demonstrable. Like I should be able to show you some series of things. This is scientific method stuff, but I should be able to evidence truth, and truth ought to be, and this is just a scientific claim, like based upon evidence. Like if you are convinced that something is true, or you're holding it, you're esteeming it as though it were true. I think if we get deeper into the scientific method, it's not like this is true and that is not true. It's more like we have failed to disprove this truth. Therefore, we'll keep at it. We'll keep trying to prove ourselves wrong. But until we fail to, we can, in the meantime, operate under the assumption that it is, that it is or maybe not. Is even a strong word for science, but some theories work really well to explain the way the world works, and they help
Yeah.
explain complicated things like cures and cell phones.
It's true. And occasionally you end up with epicycles and stuff that works really well but isn't quite accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. An interesting thing there is that where science, I think, takes a lot of chances, math is very deliberate. If you have a proof that works and the axioms which it's based on are true, then it is true. There's no wiggle room. Once you've once you've had something accepted and looked at by enough people to verify that you've done it right, 2 + 2 can't equal 5.
I like it. It's within, as I understand the mathematical disciplines, there's the very prominent asterisk that it's like, yes, that's within the constraints of the axioms that were put forward at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So it's never a universal truth. It's given these bounds, within this set, then because of these logical, literally evidenced, right? You're showing your work the entire time in a proof.
Yeah.
You can walk another human, and that's what I was saying actually. Like you can walk another human mind to the same conclusion, so that if truth is, it's kind of like information coding theory. I've got some idea in my mind, I encode it, send it wirelessly through the air into your head, where it gets decoded, hopefully reconstructed into a similar idea set that it meant when it left my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this a little bit, but there's not really many security features on this yet. Like I can send anything I want into your mind and you can't stop it. And if we do end up publishing this, like nobody else could either. Like if I say pink elephant.
I didn't do it.
You did.
I know I did.
We don't, it's like our Wi-Fi doesn't have a security password.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's troubling. Well, the only protection that we would have would be
The ideas you already have.
lie detection. It would be, they're a liar. They just made you think of a pink elephant, but there are no pink elephants. That's a lie. And reject, it's like honor. If it's coming in anyway, it gets sorted into the lie pile or the truth pile, or modernly there's like a think about it later pile, like a verify or
and there's a good amount of ignorance willfully, in most people.
Oh, we also have the concept of trust that emerges into that space, because trust will, if you're learning how to speak, right? So you're transmitting modernly probably hundreds of thousands, maybe say hundreds of thousands of ideas, distinct ideas, right? Mm-hmm. Basically every entry in an encyclopedia. It might be millions. Although a lot of them are just kind of recombinations of each other. But, you're this is a Richard Dawkins thing where he talks about, when he coined the word meme, he's the one who did it in the 70s.
Right. Yeah.
He's like applying the rules of genetics, because it does operate similarly to genes, where they are mimicable, like they're reproducible, they reproduce, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't reproduce quite perfectly. Like even now, that's one of the things probably about podcasting that's going to be so revolutionary, is you can take one idea, spread it into, 100 million people's minds, but it will get perceived slightly different in all of those. And in some of those, it may be more adaptive. Like maybe the idea will be heard in a better way than you even meant it.
Right.
And then adaptive, unfortunately, though, for memes simply means spreadable. Yeah. So then it will just spread better.
Kind of the great and terrible thing about the internet is that everybody can find the ideology that fits them, and since everybody's finding it, some people are going to be predisposed to some pretty crazy things.
Well, this is what we're talking about. Like if we're not truth seeking in the way that we would prefer to be, probably we are consensus seeking. It's not hard to find consensus on the internet.
Yeah. There's also maybe a good amount here of when someone believes something, even though they know that it's wrong or they have great suspicion that it's wrong, they believe it because it's not the objective truth that matters, but the truth subjective to what they want. Right?
Ooh. Motivated reasoning?
Yeah, motivated reasoning.
Yeah.
And so maybe truth overall isn't a good way to value ideas. Maybe it's a good way, but maybe it's not the way that's done to value ideas. It's some mixture of truth and how much that truth aligns with what you've already accepted.
Yeah, everybody has to start the story where they are.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and actually, Richard Dawkins says that in Gene's Eye View. At the end, he's like, if you have teraquads of information to upload from your parents and your tribal leaders, you just don't have time to screen it, right? You just got to accept everything as true and then sort it out later, right? Tweak it later. But it's worked enough for you to have parents and to have a tribe. So start with the presupposition that maybe they were right. And then...
and you have nothing else to compare it to.
Which is a really good point. And it wasn't until humans started to reestablish contact with one another in ways that weren't war that they were like, that's weird. They have very similar but different thoughts, which is like the evolution. I mean, that's what that's what Darwin was kind of keen to noticing. It was just, they're very similar, but a little tweaked.
Right. Yeah.
And then that enabled him to kind of like unwind the complicated knot that biology had become. So maybe there were predecessor animals to all of these, shared ancestry.
Yeah.
Which is probably, actually, that's what philosophy did, right? Once we started to talk about how we thought about things, we started to go further and further back into, well, what is the pedigree of why I think the way I think?
Yeah.
So like philosophy and history, and then that takes you back into evolutionary biology.
It's a good structure.
I wonder if we could apply it elsewhere.
Where elsewhere? I mean,
what else works like genes and memes?
I mean, neural networks work fairly similar. I mean, there's literally a evolutionary method. It's kind of outdated at this point, but it's still used where you introduce randomness and selection pressure to a series of like models, coding models.
Yeah.
And you judge them. You kill the ones that suck. You introduce variation into the ones that work.
You're right.
And I don't know much about computer science, but as I understand it, it's not the most efficient way to do it. And so, especially with large computations, where like GPT has billions of parameters, I think hundreds of billions, it's huge, where that wouldn't be very efficient, but it's still one of the early ways that works. It's one of the ways that like you could code as an amateur.
Yeah, which is what life has been doing.
Yeah.
There's definitely some like Noah Yuval Harari in this conversation, which is nice because he's pointed out some of these ideas. But I think it's interesting when you go back and you compare it to truth and consensus, beauty. I think it almost just begs now to like notice beauty throughout the day.
It's fun.
Because if you haven't noticed where you notice it, it's hard to find the parts that are like the through line through what you find beautiful.
Yeah. And maybe looking towards the basis of that, acknowledge what you find true, do a little inventory.
Wow, that's great.
And that'll probably also kind of lead you to the logical conclusion of where your ideas and your personal philosophy stands, because I'm sure it'll be strongly based on that.
I think getting there would be like an important first step, and then it would be interesting to think about what you think other people find beautiful.
Yeah, and maybe do a little analysis and see if what you are believing is in alignment with what you think is objectively true.
Oh, wow.
And maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's not so important that those two things align. If it's not that important to you, and that's what's true to you, if that's not that important, then I don't think it should matter.
Well, it's funny the way that that's set up of, objectively, that is through the eyes of others, right?
Yeah. I mean, it won't help you do your taxes or anything, but it might make you a little more happy overall.
Yeah, I like it.
you live too in tune with reality, you might become a nihilist.
Yeah, we talked about nihilism and how it's the philosophical equivalent of dividing by zero.
It's rough.
Yeah, just don't do it. Like it can be stated as a philosophy, but it doesn't mean that it's useful or meaningful.
Look at it, but not for too long.
Yeah, you don't want the abyss staring back at you. All right, we'll call it good here.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll end here. Thank you, Aspen, for joining us. That was a really interesting discussion. It's opened up a bunch of new questions for me moving forward. I really liked the part about a truth inventory. What parts try to notice throughout the day or throughout the week or across the course of your life, which truths you accepted were true when, how they've changed, like, because the inventory would change over time too.
What can I say? Pretty great stuff, you know?
Absolutely. So thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for raising me and buying me food and water and sunlight and everything I need to grow into a big, strong boy. No, I really appreciate being here. Thanks,
Excellent. Son. Awesome, son. All right. Thank you for being on the podcast, and we'll hopefully hear the listeners on the next one.